She said it right in front of everyone, at the restaurant, on my birthday, with the waiter still holding the cake. "Mom has lost her mind," my daughter announced, loud enough for the table next to us to turn their heads. "She's senile. She wants to marry the lunatic next door." The room went silent, except for the soft fizz of the sparklers on the cake. I was still holding the fork. I hadn't even blown out the candle. I just stared at her, not because I was hurt. No, not right away. At first, I was confused. I had spent my entire life doing what was asked of me. I raised her. I loved her. I sat beside her hospital bed through both of her births. I gave her the down payment for her first home. And now, here she was, calling me senile in front of my grandchildren, her husband, and a table full of strangers pretending not to listen. I remember the taste of the frosting. It was lemon, sharp and sugary. It stuck to the roof of my mouth like guilt. Her voice wouldn't stop. "You seriously expect us to believe this is love? With that man? He talks to birds and walks barefoot like some drifter. You've lost touch, Mom." Her husband, David, looked down at his lap. He never said much in these moments. My grandson fiddled with the straw in his soda, pretending not to hear. And my granddaughter, sweet Emily, just blinked at me, confused. At 11, she didn't know yet what shame was, only that her mother was angry, and I was the cause. It wasn't supposed to go like this. I had practiced it in my head, the announcement. I would smile gently, touch her hand, tell her that I'd found someone who made me feel like I wasn't just waiting to die. Someone who listened. Someone who saw me. But I never got the chance. She had read one of my messages, snooped through my phone, and decided to ambush me before I could say a word. I sat there for a moment, letting the insults sink in like cold rain through a coat. Then I said, "I'm not asking for your blessing. I'm simply informing you that I'm marrying him." Her jaw dropped open like I'd slapped her. "Do you even hear yourself? This isn't you, Mom. Dad's only been gone 11 years. 11 years, I said softly. I was alone long before that. That shut her up for a second. But only a second. She laughed, bitter. "You're really serious about this? About him?" I nodded. Slowly. I didn't say his name. I didn't need to. I could see the images running through her head. The wild garden, the rusted gate, the hens in the backyard, the clothesline full of mismatched socks, the man with the deep wrinkles and the strange, faraway eyes. To her, he was a scandal. To me, he was a quiet miracle. We didn't stay long after that. The waiter, poor boy, couldn't have been more than 19, mumbled something about dessert. I told him it was all right. I stood, fixed the collar of my cardigan, and walked toward the door. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry. But my hands were trembling. On the way out, I heard a woman whisper to her husband. She didn't look senile to me. I wish I could have thanked her. When I got home, the chickens were out, pecking at the grass near the rose bush. The man they called crazy was sitting on the back steps, a book open on his knees, glasses perched at the tip of his nose. He looked up when he saw me, his smile soft as linen. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. Instead, he stood, brushed dirt from his pants, and handed me a steaming cup of chamomile. "I added cinnamon," he said, finally. "It's supposed to calm the heart." I drank it in silence, my eyes stinging. "They think I'm crazy," I whispered. He smiled wider. "Then maybe we finally have something in common." We sat like that for a while, the sun slipping down behind the fence, shadows crawling gently toward our feet. The world slowed down. The ache in my chest loosened just a little. "I told them," I said eventually, "about the wedding." "And?" "They think I'm too old to fall in love. He chuckled under his breath. That's funny. I think you're just old enough to finally do it right. I don't know what the rest of the world saw when they looked at him, but I know what I saw. A man who grew gardens instead of grudges. A man who never raised his voice, only his hands to help. A man who had every reason to close himself off from love, but still left the gate open. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what I had been waiting for. I used to think silence was peaceful, that stillness meant safety. But the truth is, silence, when it's not chosen, is a kind of slow erasure. After my husband died, the house became quiet in a way that scraped against the skin. Not the soft hush of contentment, but the heavy kind. The kind that settles in the bones and forgets to leave. At first, the family called every day, then every week, then birthdays, then only when they needed something, a recipe, a check, a favor. I was still me, of course. My hands still worked. I still remembered the smell of lavender and old coffee, the sound of vinyl records and the weight of fresh laundry. But something about me became background. I didn't know you could disappear in your own home. I'd walk down the hallway and see the photos. Me and Tom on our wedding day, my daughter in her graduation gown, my son in his Boy Scout uniform. Moments frozen in frames, untouched by time. Unlike me. No one ever said it out loud, but I felt it in the rushed phone calls, the polite excuses, the way conversations never circled back to me. I became mom, and then grandma, and then just her. At church, people would nod kindly, then turn to someone more interesting. At the grocery store, the cashier would ask how my husband was, and I'd have to remind them, again, that he passed 11 years ago. The days got quieter. The calendar got emptier. It wasn't until I found myself talking to a bird that I realized just how alone I'd become. There was this little sparrow that came to my kitchen window every morning. I started putting crumbs on the sill, just to see if it would return. It always did. One day, I said out loud, "Good morning, sweetheart." It tilted its head, and for a second, I believed it understood me. That tiny exchange was more attention than I'd gotten in days. That's when I started noticing him, the man next door. For years, I barely gave him a second thought. He moved in 5 years ago, after the previous tenants, a loud couple with a teenage son and a barking dog, finally left. He was odd, quiet, always in his yard, always barefoot. Sometimes he wore mismatched clothes. Once I saw him with a wool scarf in August. Other times, he'd be lying flat on the grass with his eyes closed, arms stretched like he was waiting for the sky to fall. The neighborhood had nicknames for him. The Chicken Man, Mr. Moon, the Nut with the Notebook. I never called him anything. I never had to. One day, I was taking the trash out when I saw him planting something, bent over, his hands deep in the soil. There were hens clucking softly nearby, unbothered by his movements. He looked up, met my eyes, and smiled. That was the first time anyone had really looked at me in weeks, maybe months. Not through me, at me. He didn't wave, he didn't speak, just that soft, knowing smile, as if he saw something in me that hadn't surfaced in years. I looked away. Still, I began noticing the details, the way his garden bloomed despite the chaos. Tomatoes grew alongside wildflowers, herbs spilled into walking paths, vines curled along fences like curious children. He talked to the plants sometimes, whispered things to them, and the oddest part? They seemed to respond. That made the neighbors even more suspicious. "He's one of those," I heard one woman mutter. "Witchy. Strange." But I found myself watching his world like someone peeking into a warmer house through a cold window. I tried to tell my daughter once. I said, "You know the man next door?" He has hens that follow him around like puppies. She looked at me like I'd just confessed to stealing a car. Mom, please don't start making friends with the weird ones. That word stung. Weird. As if kindness and solitude were conditions. As if a man who smiled at the earth was somehow broken. So I stopped mentioning him. To her, to anyone. But I kept watching. Quietly. And maybe he was watching me too. I'd catch him glancing up now and then, usually when I wasn't at my best. Hair undone, robe stained, watering dead plants on my porch like it still mattered. But he never looked away. Not once. One morning, I left banana bread on his porch. No note, just a gesture. The next day, there was a bundle of fresh rosemary hanging on my doorknob. We never spoke. Not yet. But something had begun. I didn't fall in love that week. Not yet. But I did begin to remember what it felt like to be noticed. Not as someone's obligation or memory or financial burden, but as a living, breathing woman, one who still had a voice, a body, a soul. And as strange as it sounds, that was the first time in years I felt like I wasn't completely invisible. It happened on a Tuesday morning, the kind of quiet, aching Tuesday that blurs into all the others. The sky was bruised with low clouds, and I had decided to take the trash out before the rain came. I remember thinking the wheel on the bin was squeaking louder than usual. Strange what you notice when no one's talking to you. I didn't see the step, not in time. One crooked tile on the walkway, the same one I'd asked my son to fix last Christmas. My foot caught, and I went down hard. My elbow scraped the concrete. My hip slammed into the ground. Pain shot up my side like a scream. And the worst part? I wasn't surprised. I lay there for a moment, stunned, staring up at the gray sky. My purse had flown open. Keys, coins, tissues, a folded grocery list, scattered like pieces of me across the concrete. I reached for my phone with a shaking hand, dialed my daughter, straight to voicemail, tried again, nothing. Then my son, no answer. Then, silence. Cars passed on the main road. A lawnmower growled in the distance, but no one came. I could have stayed there for hours, an old woman on the pavement, waiting for someone who wasn't coming. But someone did. The gate creaked, then footsteps, barefoot, careful. He didn't speak. He knelt beside me and tilted his head, examining the bruise forming beneath my blouse like he was reading a map. His hand hovered in the air, not quite touching me, seeking permission. I nodded, just once. He lifted me with surprising gentleness. No rush, no questions. Like he'd done it before, maybe for someone else, someone he lost. He helped me into his kitchen. It smelled like earth and lemon balm and something baking. The walls were lined with crooked shelves, and every single one was full. Books, jars, feathers, old clocks that no longer ticked. He guided me to a chair made of wood that had clearly lived longer than both of us. He poured hot water into a mug already waiting on the counter. Chamomile, with honey, a pinch of turmeric. I don't know your name, I said softly, embarrassed. He smiled. Jonas. He didn't ask for mine. He already knew it. He cleaned my scrape with lavender oil and warm water. His hands trembled slightly, but they were steady in the ways that mattered. No words, just a calm presence that wrapped itself around me like a quilt. After a long while, I said, I tried calling them. They didn't answer. He nodded slowly, not judging, not pitying, just understanding. Then he looked at me. Not the glance people give you when they're waiting for you to finish. Not the polite smile that slides off their face the moment they think you've lost the thread. He looked at me, like I mattered, like I was there. His eyes were soft brown, lined with age and something else. Sorrow, maybe. But also warmth. He looked like someone who had watched the world fall apart, then quietly started putting it back together, one garden bed at a time. "Thank you," I whispered. He shook his head. "People fall," he said finally. "That's not the part that matters." I tilted my head. "What part matters?" He met my gaze again. "Who picks them up?" The silence between us wasn't empty. It had weight, depth. I found myself noticing everything. The way he always stood slightly to the side, never imposing. The faint scar above his eyebrow. The old piano in the corner, untouched but clearly loved. This wasn't the house of a madman. It was the house of a man who had once lived a loud life, and then chose quiet. On the wall above the sink, there was a small photograph. A woman and a child. Both gone now, I'd later learn. But in that moment, I didn't need the story to understand the grief. It was folded into everything. The way he spoke gently, the way he didn't interrupt, the way he made tea like it was a ritual of healing. I don't remember how long I stayed, but I remember how I left. I stood steady now and turned to him. "You're not what people say," I said. He raised an eyebrow. "You're not crazy," I clarified. He shrugged. "Most people only see what they expect." I stepped outside. The rain had held off. The hens pecked lazily at the grass, unbothered by my presence. I turned back toward him, and he said something I would never forget. "Come back tomorrow. I'll make tea again." That night, I sat on my porch long after the sun had disappeared. My elbow still ached. My hip was bruised. But for the first time in a long time, my heart felt intact. Someone had looked at me, really looked, and I was no longer invisible. The second time I entered his garden, I stepped more carefully. Not just because of the broken tile, but because part of me wondered if the first day had been imagined. The kindness, the calm, the silence that didn't sting. But there it was again, that quiet world behind the crooked gate. Chickens scratching near rosemary, a wind chime made from silver spoons, and him, Jonas, kneeling in the dirt, humming to something he was planting. When he saw me, he didn't wave. He simply nodded and said, "Chamomile or lemon verbena?" I chose lemon verbena. I didn't know what it tasted like, but I liked the sound of it. Light, hopeful, almost musical. He led me back into the kitchen, and the kettle was already hissing. This time, I noticed more details. A stack of well-used notebooks on the table, their spines softened by time. A photograph taped to the fridge. A little girl with curly hair holding a chicken like a teddy bear. I didn't ask. Not yet. The tea was golden, steaming in mismatched mugs. He handed me mine without ceremony, then sat across from me with his own. No coasters, no distractions, just the table, the rain beginning to patter outside, and us. "You okay?" he asked. I hesitated. No one had asked me that in weeks, not in a way that felt real. "I'm bruised," I said, "but it's the silence after the fall that hurts more than the landing." He nodded, like he understood that kind of ache. "I used to have tea with someone," he said quietly. He didn't say who. He didn't have to. "She liked it with honey and thyme." I sipped mine slowly. The lemon verbena tasted like early spring, like possibility. We didn't talk much that day, but we didn't not talk either. He asked me if I read, and I told him I used to, before my eyes started betraying me. He offered to read to me sometime, said he still had the voice for it, even if the world had grown tired of hearing him speak. That made me smile. I asked him about the chickens. "They're easier to understand than people," he said. "They gossip just as much," I replied. He laughed, a short, surprised sound, like he hadn't expected humor to live in his mouth anymore. I liked that I had been the one to draw it out. He told me their names, all women's names: Blanche, Louise, Clara, Mary Belle. "Are they named after people you knew?" "No," he said, and looked down into his tea. They're the names I imagined for daughters we never had. The word we sat in the air like a ghost. But he didn't flinch, and neither did I. I could have asked questions about the woman in the photo, about what had made him vanish from the world outside these gates. But something held me back. Not fear, not manners, respect. There's a rhythm to grief, and you don't force someone else's tempo. That day, I stayed for an hour, maybe 2. I don't remember watching the clock. All I remember is that when I stood to leave, he handed me a small paper sachet tied with twine. "Lemon verbena," he said. "Plant it. Water it every morning before the sun gets too high. Speak kindly to it." I smiled. "What happens if I do all that?" He looked at me then, long and steady. "It grows." That night, I placed the sachet beside the sink and looked at it the way some women look at letters from old lovers. Something about it, the care, the quiet invitation, made my fingers tremble. I hadn't felt chosen in a long time. The next morning, I got up early. I brewed tea, by myself this time, lemon verbena, and I whispered something to the plant I hadn't planted yet. "Thank you." I wasn't sure if I was thanking the leaf, or the man, or the universe for bringing him to my broken walkway at just the right moment. Maybe all of it. Maybe more. The rumors started like all the worst things do, quietly, with a smile. It began at the bakery. I was picking up a loaf of rye and a small pie for myself, something to share with Jonas that afternoon. The cashier, a young man with more attitude than years, looked at my items and said, "Treating someone special?" I smiled. "Maybe I am." He raised an eyebrow, leaned slightly toward the older woman in line behind me, and stage whispered, "I bet it's for the chicken man." They both laughed. I didn't. By the time I reached my gate, I could feel their voices clinging to my coat like dust. The neighborhood had always been chatty. Old houses breed older habits, gossip, judgment, the constant need to compare who's doing better, who's still alone, whose lawn is too long. But this was different. This wasn't idle curiosity. This was ridicule. 2 days later, I overheard the mailman speaking with my next-door neighbor, Grace, the one who pretends she's too pious to eavesdrop, but never misses a scandal. "She's over there every day now," he said, stuffing envelopes into her box. "He's got her spellbound." Grace nodded solemnly, as if I were part of some unholy ritual instead of just drinking tea and listening to the birds. "She used to be such a respectable woman," she sighed, with a tisk. "Her husband was good to her. God rest his soul." I stood on my porch, keys in hand, listening. No one saw me. That was the part that hurt the most. Later that week, Jonas and I were sitting under his apricot tree, watching the hens circle like old women at a dance. He read me a passage from a book I didn't catch the name of. Something about time not being a line, but a circle. "You know they're talking about us," I said. He paused, closed the book softly. "Who?" "Everyone." He looked at me, not with fear, not even surprise, just quiet sadness. "They've always talked about me," he said. "Now they've just added your name to the song." I expected anger or defensiveness, but all he did was offer me another slice of peach pie and pour more tea. "They think I'm losing it," I said, almost laughing. "That I'm being manipulated. That I'm—" I hesitated on the word. "Embarrassing." Jonas wiped his hands with a napkin, then folded it neatly in his lap. "Are you embarrassed?" I looked at him. At the soft crinkles at the corner of his eyes, at the dirt beneath his fingernails, at the gentleness in the way he waited for my answer. I shook my head. "No." "Then let them talk." It sounded so simple when he said it, but later, walking home, the voices grew louder in my memory. Not his, Theirs. She's gone soft in the head. Poor woman, clinging to whatever attention she can get. Can't blame her. I mean, she is alone. I wasn't just hearing them, I was absorbing them, carrying them. And when I looked in the mirror that night, I wasn't sure if I saw myself or their version of me. The next morning, my daughter called. It was brief. I heard from Grace that you've been spending time with that man. She said, that man, like it was a disease. I took a breath. Yes, his name is Jonas. A pause. Then, what exactly is going on, Mom? I knew what she meant, but I let the silence stretch anyway. We drink tea, we talk, he's kind to me. She exhaled sharply. You do understand how this looks, don't you? At your age? My age? I repeated. People talk. I know, I hear them. Another pause. Then the voice I knew too well, the one that always came before the lecture. You don't have to do this to yourself. He's not, well, and frankly, neither are you if you think this is. I hung up, not out of spite, but because the kettle was whistling, and Jonas had promised to bring marigold tea today. I told him about the call later, as we watched a bird build a nest in the rafters above his porch. She's worried about me, I said, but not in the way that counts. Not because she sees me struggling, because she sees me happy. Jonas was quiet for a while. Then he said, there's something dangerous about an old woman who still believes she deserves joy. It makes people uncomfortable. I smiled. Then I laughed. A real, full laugh that came from somewhere deeper than my lungs. And he laughed too. The rumors didn't stop. They thickened, spread. But something inside me changed. I stopped hiding the teacups when visitors came. I stopped walking around the back of the house when I visited Jonas. I stopped pretending I was just checking on the chickens. And one morning, I wore a red scarf, the same one my daughter once called too loud for someone your age. Jonas said I looked like autumn in motion. I believed him. Let them whisper. Let them roll their eyes at the woman who still danced barefoot on bad hips. Let them call me foolish for laughing at nothing. They don't know what it feels like to be noticed, chosen, cared for, not out of obligation, but affection. But I do, and I'm not sorry. I had known for some time that there was a sorrow inside Jonas, something deeper than loneliness, something rooted. It was in the way he paused before speaking, like each word had to be sifted through memory before he could let it go. It was in the way he looked at children on the street with both wonder and hesitation, the way he held objects, old photographs, cracked teacups, as if they could vanish if he wasn't gentle enough. But it wasn't until a stormy afternoon that he finally told me. It had rained all morning, one of those long, cold drizzles that make the bones feel older and the heart feel heavier. I had still come, wrapped in my thickest sweater, umbrella in hand, already soaked at the hem. He opened the door before I could knock. You looked determined, he said. I'm too old to cancel plans for weather, I replied. He gave me that half smile of his, the one that pulled more from the eyes than the mouth, and waved me in. Inside, the kettle was already on. The lights were soft. There was music playing, cello, low and mournful. I sat by the window, watching water streak down the glass like tears. That's when I noticed the box.
It was open on the table, a shallow wooden chest filled with letters, old newspaper clippings, and what looked like a dried flower wrapped in ribbon. Jonas saw me looking. For a moment, I thought he'd close it, but he didn't. Instead, he sat down across from me, rested his hands on the edge of the box, and said quietly, "Do you want to know why they call me crazy?" I didn't speak. He took that as a yes. "My wife's name was Elena," he said, "and our daughter was Mira, short for miracle. She came late in life, after years of doctors and silence and hoping. He reached into the box and handed me a photo, a woman with wild black hair and eyes that sparkled, and a child in pigtails holding a drawing like it was treasure. She loved drawing birds, he continued. We had notebooks filled with them. She wanted to be an ornithologist. That was her word. She could barely spell it. He smiled at the memory, but his eyes were already darkening. It was a Sunday, he said. Just like any other. I stayed behind to finish grading papers, and they went to visit her sister. His hands tightened. There was a truck. Driver didn't stop. I got the call before lunch. The rain tapped louder on the windows. I felt my chest sink, my breath catch, but I didn't interrupt. I stopped speaking in the classroom that week. I tried, but every word cracked. I tried going back, but the students looked at me like I was a shadow. The words didn't come right. I couldn't finish a sentence without hearing her voice. He looked up at me, so I stopped talking, to most people. He wasn't crying, but I was. Silently. Softly. He saw, but didn't comment. Just placed a napkin beside my tea. I sold the house, quit the university, moved here, planted a garden because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. I looked at the plants outside, the chaotic, beautiful mess of color and life. He continued, the chickens. I got them because Mira used to pretend they were princesses. She said each one had a secret kingdom. He smiled again, faintly. So now I keep their kingdoms safe. I wanted to say something, anything, to fill the space, but no words felt right, so I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. His fingers trembled once, then stilled. We stayed like that for a long time. No advice, no platitudes, just presence. Sometimes that's the only language left. When the rain softened, he stood and returned everything gently to the box, except the drawing. He handed it to me, Mira's birds in flight, drawn in blue ink with tiny hearts for wings. She would have liked you, he said softly. I swallowed hard. I would have liked her too. That night, I lay in bed holding that drawing in my lap, the edges worn soft by time. I had learned something that day, not just about Jonas, but about the nature of grief. Some people let it harden them, turn them bitter, closed off, hollow, but not him. He had taken his sorrow and planted it, grown it into something living, chaotic, yes, but alive. And now somehow I was part of that garden too. People called him crazy, but they didn't know, they never asked. They never sat beside him and drank tea on a rainy afternoon and listened to the story of a man who loved so deeply it nearly killed him, and then loved again. Quietly. It started with a song, not a fancy one. Not from the radio or some grand orchestra. Just a tune hummed under his breath as he watered the lavender near the chicken coop. I was sitting on the back step with a cup of dandelion tea, watching sunlight scatter across the garden like gold dust. It was one of those rare mornings when the air felt lighter. Not hot, not cold, just soft. He hummed the tune twice, then, without a word, held out his hand to me. At first, I thought he needed help, maybe to bend down or step over something, but no. He smiled and said, "Come on." "To where?" I asked. "Here," he said, gently tugging me up. "It's Sunday. That's dancing day." I stared at him like he was teasing me, but he wasn't. He was perfectly serious and perfectly barefoot. I laughed, instinctively covering my chest with one hand. "I haven't danced in 20 years. "Then you're overdue." My heart stuttered. "But I don't know the steps." He stepped closer. "Neither do I." There was no music. Not officially. Just wind. Chickens clucking. The faint whistle of a far-off kettle. And the rhythm of two aging hearts stubbornly refusing to be still. He placed one hand on my waist, the other around my fingers, loose, not demanding. I followed him slowly, unsure at first. My knees protested, my back whispered warnings. But then something surprising happened. My body remembered. Not the steps, maybe, but the feeling. We turned slowly between the tomato vines and the old watering can, twirling beneath a sky that didn't care if we were graceful or clumsy. I felt like a girl again. Not because my body was young, it wasn't. But because someone looked at me like I was made of starlight instead of statistics. He whispered something as we moved. "What?" I said, "Don't look down." "Why not?" "You'll miss the way the light looks in your eyes." I laughed so hard I nearly tripped. He caught me, steadying me with both arms, and then, without hesitation, spun me. Yes, spun me. And I, this woman who hadn't been touched with tenderness in over a decade, laughed so loud I startled the hens. He joined in, and soon we were both just laughing, dancing, twirling, holding on, two souls worn down by time, choosing to be joyful for no reason at all. Afterward, we sat on the grass, breathless. I leaned back on my hands. My hip throbbed slightly, but I didn't care. He turned to me. "My wife and I used to dance in the kitchen," he said softly. "Sometimes in socks, sometimes in silence." I nodded. "My husband never danced. He said it made him feel foolish." Jonas chuckled. "Maybe love is a little foolish. Maybe that's what makes it brave." We sat quietly for a moment, letting the breeze carry the memory away. "I don't feel old when I'm with you," I whispered. "You're not," he said. "But I am." "No," he replied. "You're just finally living again." That evening, I looked at myself in the mirror, not to fix my hair or smooth my wrinkles, but to see. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes were bright, and my smile wasn't the polite one I wore for family. It was different. It reached all the way to who I used to be. The next Sunday, we danced again, and the one after that. Sometimes to music, sometimes not, sometimes in shoes, often barefoot. Once we even danced in the rain, slippery, chaotic, laughing so hard we had to hold on to each other just to stay upright. People watched, of course, from their windows, from across fences. Grace mentioned it one day while we passed on the sidewalk. "Saw you dancing again. Quite the show." I smiled. "You should join us sometime." She scoffed, but her eyes lingered, not with judgment, with something else. Maybe longing. By the end of the month, Sunday dances became tradition. Not because we were good at it, but because the world had told us to sit down, be quiet, and disappear. And we had decided instead to waltz in the garden and remind each other that joy doesn't belong only to the young. Sometimes I wonder if people who saw us from their windows thought we were mad. Two elders swaying through flower beds and clover. But if madness means being held without judgment, if it means feeling sunlight on your skin and laughter in your lungs again, then let them call it what they want. We called it love. They didn't even knock. The car pulled up around noon on a Thursday. I was in the garden with Jonas, harvesting mint and lemon balm for drying. We had just finished laughing over a particularly defiant chicken who'd nested in an old shoe. Then I heard the slam of a door, footsteps, a voice I knew far too well. "Mom?" I turned, and there she was, my daughter, Lauren. Her lips pursed tight, arms crossed like a judge entering the courtroom. Beside her stood David, her husband, holding a thick brown envelope. I already knew what it was before he opened his mouth. "Can we talk?" she asked, but it wasn't a question. I looked at Jonas. He nodded once, quiet, calm. I followed them inside, leaving the herbs half-picked on the garden bench. They sat at the kitchen table like strangers in a bank meeting. Lauren looked around the room with visible discomfort, eyes landing on the teacups, the soft music from the record player, the notebook Jonas had left open on the counter. "This has gone too far," she said. I waited. She continued, "We're worried about you. You've been isolating, making irrational decisions, ignoring our calls, spending time with someone who clearly has," she lowered her voice, "issues." I tilted my head. "He has chickens. That's not a psychiatric condition." David placed the envelope on the table between us. "We've spoken to an attorney," he said gently, "about conservatorship, just to protect you, your assets, your health. If something were to happen—" "Something has happened," I interrupted. "I fell in love." Lauren scoffed, loud, sharp, unkind. "Mom, he's not normal," she said. "He talks to plants. He collects feathers. He hasn't worked in years." I stared at her for a long moment. "And how many years has David worked from a yacht while your credit card statements pile up on my dining table?" Her mouth dropped open. I stood. I may be old, I may be bruised, but I am not helpless. I am not confused. And I am not signing away my life so you can feel more comfortable with who I've chosen to spend it with. David stood, hands up. "No one's trying to control you. We just want to make sure you're thinking clearly." "I've never been clearer," Lauren stood too. What about Dad? What about everything you built together? You're just throwing that away to dance barefoot with a man you barely know? I looked at her. Long and hard. You think love only counts when it comes in a ring box and a mortgage. But the love I had with your father ended the day he died, and I've been grieving ever since. Not just him, but the way you forgot I existed. Her eyes flickered. She didn't expect that. I continued, quieter now. You don't call unless it's about money. You don't visit unless it's a holiday. You didn't notice I stopped smiling until I started again, with Jonas. The room went silent. Then Lauren grabbed the envelope, shoved it into her purse, and turned to leave. I don't know who you are anymore, she muttered. At the door, I stopped her. No, sweetheart. You just never took the time to find out. She left without another word. Jonas was still in the garden. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't need to. I sat beside him on the bench, took his hand, and let the tears fall silently. He reached over and plucked a sprig of mint from the basket. Smell this. I did. Fresh, sharp, alive. You're not losing anything, he said gently. You're just choosing what to keep. That night I sat at my desk and did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. Not to Lauren, not to David, to myself. I wrote down the truth. I am not a burden. I am not past love. I am not ashamed. I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of my journal behind a dried petal Jonas had given me on our third tea date, proof that I still belonged to the world, even if my own daughter couldn't see it. The next morning, Jonas handed me a tiny envelope with no writing on it. Inside was a seed. What's it for? I asked. He smiled. To plant when you feel brave again. I held it in my palm for a long time that day, like it was the smallest kind of rebellion. Because maybe that's what love is. Not a dramatic declaration, not a perfect story, but a single seed handed to you by someone who believes you can still grow, even when everyone else thinks you're done blooming. I never imagined I would be the one to propose, not at 68, not with gray hair and sore knees and a daughter threatening to take away my house, not after a lifetime of folding myself into smaller and smaller corners to make other people comfortable. But maybe that's exactly why I had to be the one to ask. Because for once in my life, I wasn't waiting for permission. It began with a ring. 2, actually. I found them at a small antique shop tucked behind a flower stall downtown, the kind of place that smells like cedar and dust and forgotten stories. They weren't expensive, they weren't even polished, but they were perfect. Silver, simple, worn smooth by other hands that once believed in something. I bought them both without hesitation, and for the first time in years I didn't feel reckless. I felt certain. The proposal wasn't planned. There was no script, no grand gesture, no audience, just a Tuesday afternoon, a cup of cinnamon tea, Jonas humming to himself while tying up tomato vines near the back gate. I stood at the threshold of the garden for a long moment, rings in my pocket, heart fluttering like the wings of a nervous bird. Then I called out, "Jonas?" He looked up, shading his eyes from the sun. "Yes?" "I need to ask you something." He dropped the twine and walked over, wiping his hands on his trousers. "What is it?" I reached into my pocket, held out the small, time-worn rings resting in my palm. "I don't want to be alone anymore," I said, voice trembling. "Not in the quiet, not in the mornings, not when the seasons change, not when they don't call. I want to belong to someone who remembers the sound of my laugh, someone who sees me." His eyes widened, then softened. He didn't interrupt, just listened. I breathed in. "Will you marry me?" He looked at the rings, then at me, and for a moment, just a moment, I saw him as a boy again. Young, shy, still full of wonder. Still willing to believe that joy could knock on your door twice in one lifetime. Then he whispered, "Yes." And again, louder, with tears in his voice, "Yes, before it's too late." He didn't try the ring on right away. Instead, he held it to his chest, like it was sacred, like I was sacred. We didn't kiss, not then. That came later, softly, gently, as if neither of us wanted to break the spell. But in that moment, standing in a garden stitched together by grief and green things, I felt like the youngest woman in the world. The next day, we sat down to plan. There was no talk of venues, no long guest list. No dress fittings or color palettes. He said, "What do you want it to feel like?" And I said, "Real." So we made it real. We picked wildflowers for centerpieces, marigolds, lavender, sage. I ironed a soft blue blouse I hadn't worn in years. He found a pair of suspenders buried in the back of a drawer. I mailed invitations to my children, knowing full well they wouldn't come. But still, I hoped. Jonas carved our initials into the base of an apricot tree. I pressed a dried petal into my journal. 2 days before the wedding, it rained. Hard. The garden flooded. The hens took shelter in the shed. The apricot blossoms fell in clumps. Jonas watched from the porch and said, "You think she's trying to tell us something?" "Who?" "The sky." I leaned my head on his shoulder. "Maybe she's just nervous for us." He chuckled. "Then we're not alone." I didn't sleep much the night before, not because I was afraid, but because my heart kept whispering, "This is real. This is happening. You are still allowed to be chosen." In the early hours of morning, I lit a candle, and I thanked my late husband, not because I was leaving him behind, but because he had loved me first, and now Jonas would love me next. At sunrise, I tucked one ring into a small velvet pouch and placed it beside the tea kettle. Then I looked at myself in the mirror, hair soft, lines deeper, eyes steady. And I said aloud, "You made it." That afternoon, under the apricot tree, barefoot in the mud, I took his hand, and we said yes, without fanfare, without apology. Just two souls, tired, bruised, wiser than most, choosing each other when the world wasn't looking. They would say I was too old, but I knew the truth. I wasn't too old. I was right on time. The chairs were empty. I had set out 12, just in case. 4 for family, 4 for neighbors who used to borrow sugar, 4 for friends I hadn't seen in years, but still sent Christmas cards to. But when the hour came, and the breeze shifted gently through the apricot branches, the only ones who showed were the birds. And Jonas. And that was enough. I won't lie to you. It hurt. Every unopened RSVP, every silence on the phone, every polite excuse from people who once cried at my dinner table, even my daughter, who once begged me to sew her veil by hand, didn't come. I kept glancing at the road, half expecting to see her car pull in, to hear her say, "I still think you're making a mistake, but I couldn't stay away." But she didn't come. Not that day. Not ever. The music came from a small Bluetooth speaker, balanced on a garden stool. It played softly, warbling slightly, as if the songs themselves were afraid of intruding. Jonas stood beneath the apricot tree in a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled, suspenders tugged high over his chest. He wore no shoes. Said he wanted to feel the earth say yes. I wore blue. Soft. Flowing. A color my daughter once told me aged me. But Jonas had looked at me when I stepped out the back door and whispered, "You look like the sky when it's about to change." I never wanted to look like anything else again. The officiant was a retired librarian named Ruth. She was 92 and had a voice like warm gravel. "Do you want the standard vows?" she'd asked us the day before. I shook my head. "No, we've already done in sickness and in health, more than most." "Then what do you want to promise?" she asked. Jonas answered. "To stay awake, to notice, to listen," I said. "To make tea when the world feels loud," she smiled. "Then let's begin." There was no aisle, no veil, no bouquet to toss, just me, walking barefoot across soft grass toward a man who had shown up when no one else did. My knees ached, my feet wobbled slightly, but my heart walked strong. Ruth began the ceremony with a poem about time, then stepped back and gave us the floor. Jonas reached into his pocket, pulled out the ring I'd given him, and slipped it on my finger with a hand that still trembled, not from fear, but reverence. Then I did the same for him. We didn't cry, we smiled. And then we kissed, shy, sweet, lingering. The kind of kiss that says, we know what love costs, and we're willing to pay again. Afterward, we sat at the little table beneath the tree. 2 bowls of soup, 2 slices of lemon pie, 1 jug of rosemary lemonade. No one to toast, no one to criticize. No speeches, no tension, just peace, just us. I looked across the garden at the empty chairs, and I whispered, It's funny, isn't it? How much space we keep saving for people who never arrive. Jonas took my hand. Maybe they weren't meant to come. Why not? Because this wasn't for them. This was for us. That night, we slow danced beneath the string lights I'd tied up the day before. Some of them flickered. One bulb was out completely, but it didn't matter. The chickens cooed softly in their coop. The moon rose, uninvited, but welcome. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had come home, not to a place, but to a person.
Later, when we crawled into bed, side by side, still wearing our wedding clothes, Jonas took my hand and kissed the ring on my finger. Then he whispered, "It doesn't matter who didn't come. You did." People say weddings are supposed to be the happiest day of your life, but ours was something else entirely. It was the realest day of my life, unpretending, undefended, unashamed. They didn't show up, but I did, and so did he. And sometimes, when the world forgets you exist, showing up for each other is enough. It didn't happen all at once. A house doesn't become a home in a single evening, even after a wedding. It happens slowly, in the way routines shift, spaces fill, and silences soften. Before Jonas, my house was tidy, too tidy, the kind of quiet that echoes, curtains drawn to keep out the sun, chairs pushed in, clocks ticking too loudly, everything in its place, but me. After Jonas moved in, things changed, not with a bang, but with small, gentle waves. The first thing to go was the silence. He played music in the morning, always soft, jazz mostly, sometimes cello. Once, when I had a bad dream, I woke to the sound of Chopin drifting from the kitchen and cinnamon toast waiting beside a folded napkin that said, "Still here." He brought his books, stacks of them, poetry, botany, folklore, old children's stories. I found places for them on every shelf, and when we ran out of space, we made more. He added hooks in the hallway for his gardening hat and my shawls. He patched the leaky faucet, fixed the door that always squeaked, and lined the pantry with lavender sachets that made opening a can of beans feel like opening a letter from spring. The chickens came too, of course. We built them a small coop in the back corner of the yard. Jonas named it the Parliament. "They don't always agree," he explained, "but they always show up. Just like us. Our days took on rhythm. He rose with the sun and fed the birds." I followed soon after, wrapped in the same cardigan I wore the day I fell for him. We made tea. We tended the garden. We read to each other. Sometimes we spoke. Sometimes we didn't. But the silence between us no longer felt like absence. It felt like breath. One afternoon, I found him repainting the porch swing, sky blue with white arms. I stepped outside, hands on my hips. "You didn't even ask." He grinned. "You like it?" I looked at the swing, then at him. "It's the color of hope," I said. We ate dinner outside most evenings. Lanterns swayed above us. The chickens clucked softly as if sharing bedtime stories. The table was never fancy, a mismatched cloth, 2 bowls, something simple. But everything tasted better, even leftovers, especially joy. He began writing again. Little things at first. Notes in the margins of old notebooks, then full pages, then whole stories. He showed me one, a fable about an old crow who saved a village by teaching them how to listen. "You are the crow," I told him. "No," he smiled. "You are." I painted again, too. Not for show, not to hang, just to feel the colors move through me. One canvas, half finished, sat by the window. It was a mess of gold and violet, blurred edges and reaching lines. I didn't know what it was supposed to be yet, just that it felt honest. When Jonas saw it, he nodded slowly. "I think it's becoming something," he said. So was I. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in the hallway mirror, not because I was checking my appearance, but because I had forgotten what I looked like when I was happy. Not perfect, not fixed, just here, alive. He brought home honey one morning, local, thick, golden. I spread it on warm bread and said, "This tastes like childhood." He replied, "Then let's make a little more of it." Of course, it wasn't all soft music and laughter. We had disagreements about composting, about thermostat settings, about how many herbs were too many on a single windowsill. But even those moments felt safe, because we'd both lived through storms where no one came back for us. And now, we chose to return to each other, every time. One night, as we sat on the swing, he turned to me and said, "This house breathes differently now." I nodded. So do I. We didn't invite anyone to see our little home after the wedding. We didn't need to, because the ones who cared knew where to find us, and the ones who didn't probably never really saw us to begin with. There's a peace that comes with building a life from scratch, not with new things, but with old hands and clear eyes. And every time we watered the garden, fed the hens, folded laundry, or danced in the kitchen, I could feel the walls sigh in relief, because love had come back. And this time, it wasn't in a rush. This wasn't just the house I'd grown old in. It was the house where I came alive again. She didn't call first, just showed up one afternoon, in heels too high for the garden path and sunglasses too dark for the truth. I was sitting on the porch swing, shelling peas, the smell of thyme and lemon drifting from the kitchen. Jonas was inside, writing. The chickens were clucking lazily under the apricot tree. Then I saw her, Lauren, my daughter, tense shoulders, tight jaw, purse clutched like a shield. I said nothing, just kept shelling. She cleared her throat. "Can we talk?" It wasn't a question, but I nodded anyway. She sat beside me, careful not to brush her dress against the old wooden bench. She looked at the house, the garden, the line of drying herbs, the wind chimes Jonas had made from repurposed silverware. Then finally, she looked at me. "You changed the will." Ah, there it was. "I updated it," I said calmly. "You left the house to him." "I did." She blinked, stunned. "You're really doing this?" I turned my face toward hers, steady. "I already did." She looked older than I remembered, not in her face, but in her eyes, as if disappointment had worn a groove in them too deep to undo. "Do you even know what he wants from you?" I set down the bowl of peas. "He wants to grow tomatoes and sit with me in the evenings and write stories he never thought he'd finish. That's all." Her voice sharpened. "He's not your family." I looked at her for a long time. "No," I said, "but he shows up like one." She went quiet. Behind us, the wind picked up slightly. The garden rustled. A hen flapped her wings. Lauren folded her arms. "You think I'm the villain here?" "I think you're afraid." "Of what?" "Of watching me choose someone who makes me happy, when you haven't done that in years." Her jaw clenched. "You don't know anything about my marriage." "I know you stopped laughing," I said softly. "I know you stopped visiting unless there was a form to sign or a favor to ask." She turned away. I could have softened it, but I didn't. Some truths don't belong in bubble wrap. "You were always strong," she muttered. "But this isn't strength, it's desperation." I nodded slowly. Yes, I was desperate, for years. Desperate for a voice, for company, for purpose, for love that didn't come with guilt. She blinked, and I saw it, just for a second, that flicker of the child she used to be. The one who ran to me when she scraped her knees, who cried in my lap after her first heartbreak, the girl who once looked at me like I was the safest place in the world. "I'm not trying to hurt you," she said finally. "I know." "Then why does this feel like betrayal?" "Because you thought I'd never move on." Silence. I softened. "You wanted me to stay frozen, to keep being the widow, the quiet mother, the background figure in your life. Tears pricked the corners of her eyes. You were always there, always dependable, always. She struggled for the word. Stable. I still am, I said. Just not for the same people. Jonas stepped out onto the porch, holding 2 mugs of tea. He paused when he saw her. Lauren looked at him, really looked, and I saw the wall go up again. The same wall that had always been there. The one made of fear and pride and all the expectations she never dared to drop. She stood. I won't fight you in court. I just thought you should know how this feels. I do know, I said gently, because it's how I felt when you stopped seeing me as a woman. She left without saying goodbye. Jonas sat beside me, placed a mug in my hands and said, "That went better than I expected." I let out a shaky breath. "She's not a bad person," I whispered. "No," he agreed. "Just someone who forgot what love looks like when it's not wrapped in rules." That night, I sat by the window and wrote a letter. To Lauren. I didn't scold. I didn't explain. I just wrote, "You will understand one day when someone chooses you gently and you are brave enough to let them in. I'll be here when that day comes. Until then, I'm living. Finally. With love, Mom." I folded it, tucked it in my drawer, and let it go. They say family is everything, but sometimes family is who shows up with tea when your hands are shaking, who lets you speak slowly and never once looks away, who lets you be whole instead of useful. Jonas was that for me, and for now, that was everything I needed. I thought I knew him. After the wedding, after the quiet mornings, after the dancing and the storm and the deep silences that passed between us without fear, I thought I had seen everything there was to see of Jonas. But one evening, just as the sky began to turn the color of ripe peaches, he asked me to follow him. "Where are we going?" I asked, brushing soil from my skirt. "Somewhere I haven't shown anyone," he said. "Not since before." He didn't say before what. He didn't have to. He led me past the garden and the hens, past the compost bin and the apricot tree, past everything I thought was the farthest edge of his world. There was an old wooden shed at the back of the yard, one I had always assumed was empty, forgotten, a place for rakes and rust. But Jonas took out a tiny brass key from his pocket and unlocked the door with quiet reverence. The hinges groaned, the dust shifted, the scent hit me instantly. Paper, cedar, something warm and delicate beneath it all. A memory maybe, or many. Inside, the walls were lined with shelves, not with tools, but with books. Not store-bought books, not bound and titled. Notebooks, journals, dozens of them, hundreds, all sizes, all colors, some weathered, some pristine, all handwritten. He stood in the doorway, watching me watch them. "What is this?" I whispered. He stepped beside me. "This is my secret garden." I reached out and touched one gently. It had Mira's name written in looping cursive on the spine. He nodded toward it. "That one's a bedtime story she never heard. I kept writing them, even after." My hand hovered. "May I?" He nodded once. I opened the notebook. Inside were pages of drawings and words. Simple, beautiful. A tale about a girl who could speak to clouds, who whispered her worries into the sky and waited for the rain to carry them away. The handwriting was careful, deliberate, as if every letter carried weight. I turned another page, then another, and suddenly I was crying. I thought you stopped writing," I said, blinking away tears. "I stopped sharing," he replied, but the words kept coming, so I gave them somewhere to live. He motioned to a bench in the corner of the shed. "I used to sit here after everyone else was asleep. It was the only way I knew how to stay." I looked around again, all these stories, all these pieces of him hidden away like wildflowers in the dark. I didn't want to be read. He continued, softer now. I just wanted to be remembered. I turned to him. You don't have to hide this anymore. He looked down at his hands. It felt safer. From what? From being misunderstood. I reached out and took both his hands in mine. Then let's misunderstand each other, together. Let's read and rewrite and mispronounce and lose our place and start again, out loud. He smiled, not the polite smile, not the careful one, but the one he used when he thought no one was looking. Over the next few days, we began sorting the notebooks. We started with the oldest ones, written when his grief was fresh, his pain still bleeding onto the page. Some were hard to read. Some made me close the cover and just hold it against my chest. But others were stunning, magical, full of wonder and strange creatures and healing winds and secret spells disguised as lullabies. I think Mira would have wanted these out in the world, I said one night. He was quiet. Then, only if you read them with me. So we did. Every night after dinner, we sat by the window, and I read aloud while he closed his eyes and listened. Sometimes he corrected me gently when I missed a word. Sometimes he changed an ending halfway through, and we'd laugh about it like we were children making up fairy tales in a blanket fort. He began writing again, too, not just for Mira, but for me. Small notes, short poems tucked into napkins. One day, he wrote on the edge of my teacup, "You are the soft place my words land now." There was one journal he hadn't let me see. It sat on the very top shelf, spine worn, pages bulging with use. One evening, I reached for it. He stopped me, gently. "That one is where I wrote her goodbye." I nodded. "I won't read it," I said. But a few nights later, he handed it to me anyway. It's time someone did. I didn't read it aloud. I read it slowly, page by page, alone. It wasn't just a goodbye to his daughter. It was a map of a man trying to keep breathing when every breath hurt. And on the final page, scribbled like a confession, were 5 words. She told me to love again. I looked at him when I finished. "I think you listened." He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face. "I tried. And then you showed up, like a poem I never thought I'd understand, but couldn't stop reading." It was a Tuesday morning. The air was still, almost unnaturally so. The kind of stillness that hums beneath the skin before something changes. I made the tea, cinnamon and chamomile, just the way he liked it, and set 2 mugs by the window. Jonas always rose before me. I liked waking to the sound of the kettle, the soft murmur of his slippers on the kitchen floor, the creak of the porch swing. But that morning, nothing came. Just quiet. Too quiet. I found him still in bed, peaceful, his hands folded over his chest, one of them resting lightly on a small envelope. His glasses were on the nightstand, and beside them, a tiny sprig of dried rosemary, from our garden, from our hands. I called his name softly, once, then again. But he was already gone. There are moments that split time, before, after. This was mine. I didn't scream, I didn't run. I sat beside him, took his hand, and held it like it still carried warmth. And for a while, it did. The envelope had my name on it, in his handwriting, slanted, steady. Inside, a note, only a few lines, but they carried the weight of 1,000 pages. "My darling, if you're reading this, it means I've left just before the next bloom. But I go full, not empty. You gave me back my voice, my rhythm, my breath. You were not a second chance. You were the reward. Love, always, Jay." I read it 3 times. Then I laid it on his chest, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "Thank you." He looked like he was dreaming. I hope he was. The house felt impossibly quiet that day. The walls held their breath. The garden, for once, did not sing. Even the chickens were still. I moved slowly, gently, as if waking from something sacred. I opened the windows, let the light in, sat on the porch with his tea growing cold beside mine, and I let the sorrow come. Not like a flood, more like a tide. Soft, persistent, reverent. I didn't call my daughter until the next morning. She didn't say much, but she came. And when she stepped into the house, when she saw the swing, the stories, the tea mugs still resting in their place, something in her changed. She sat down across from me, took my hand in hers, and whispered, "I'm sorry." I nodded. So am I. We stayed like that for a while. A small beginning, or maybe just an understanding. The funeral was held under the apricot tree, just like he would have wanted. No suits, no long speeches, just stories and soft music and hands in the dirt. The neighbors came, some old friends, a few curious souls who had watched us dance through the garden and never quite understood until now. Ruth, our 92-year-old officiant, read from one of his journals. A short story he once wrote for Mira about a man who taught birds to sing their grief into song. I listened, and I wept. Not for what I lost, but for what I got to love. Later that evening, after the guests had gone, I sat on the porch alone. The house behind me was full of memories. The earth beneath me, full of roots. The sky above me, full of stars he had once named in a notebook just for me. I held the letter again, ran my fingers over each word. You were not a second chance. You were the reward. And I realized, so was he. Jonas was my final chapter, but not the end of the story, because what he planted in me, with words, with silence, with presence, was still blooming. Every time I write, every time I laugh alone, every time I make tea for one and still pour 2 cups out of habit. Grief is love's shadow. But even in shadow, we remember the shape of the light. I tucked his letter inside my journal, beneath a sprig of rosemary and a sketch he once drew of the two of us, side by side on a bench, the garden curling around our feet like a cat. He had titled it, "Here is where the world softened." And I knew. That's exactly what he gave me. A boy stopped me on the street the other day. I was walking home from the market, arms full of rosemary, bread, and ripe pears. The breeze had turned warm, the kind of air that carries memories if you let it. He couldn't have been older than 10. Freckles, a tear in his shirt, curiosity in his eyes. He pointed to the house and said, "Were you really married to the crazy man with the chickens?" I looked at him for a second, then smiled. "No," I said. "I was married to the man who listened to birds better than most people listen to each other." He looked confused. I laughed, the kind of laugh that comes from deep inside your ribs, and kept walking. They still call me strange in this town. The woman who plants herbs in the rain. The barefoot bride. The one who dances with ghosts. But I don't mind. Let them name me however they need. I know who I am. I'm the woman who laughed at the sky when it told her she was too old to fall in love, and laughed harder when she did. It's been 2 years since Jonas passed, and the house is still full of him. The swing still creaks just before dusk. The hens still cluck like gossiping grandmothers. His notebooks line the shelves, and some nights I still read one aloud, just in case he's listening, which in some way, he always is. People ask me sometimes, "Don't you get lonely?" And I do. Of course I do. But it's not the kind of loneliness that hollows you. It's the kind that sits beside you like a friend who doesn't speak, but lets you cry without asking for a reason. There's grace in that. There's peace in learning the difference between being alone and being abandoned. Jonas taught me that. My daughter visits more now, not often, but enough. She brings lemon cake and apologizes with her eyes. I don't press. I don't preach. I just let her come. One day, she asked if I ever regretted giving him the house. I said, "He gave it back to me first." She nodded, didn't say more. But she understood. I published his stories. Not all of them, just a small collection. The ones about Mira, the ones about hope. They're in the library now. Sometimes I go just to watch people pick them up without knowing whose hands once held that pen. It feels like introducing him to the world, slowly, quietly, the way he would have wanted. There's a new apricot tree in the yard now. The old one fell during a storm last winter, its roots finally letting go. I cried for days. Then I planted a new one, smaller, but full of promise. Every time it blossoms, I tell Jonas about it. I say, "She's learning, just like we did." And I imagine him smiling somewhere, saying, "Give her time. All good things bloom late." Sometimes, late at night, I sit at the window with my tea, still 2 mugs, though I only drink 1, and write in the journal he left blank for me. I fill it with what we were, what I still am, what I'm becoming. I write like I'm speaking to him, because in some ways, I still am. They say the heart has no age. I say it has seasons. And mine, after years of frost, silence, and stillness, finally found spring at 68. And oh, how it bloomed. So yes, I am the woman who fell in love barefoot, who married a man with chickens and notebooks and a broken past, who was called foolish, senile, embarrassing, who was left by her own children and found by someone else's story, who chose love not because it was perfect, but because it was real. And when the sky said, "You, now, at your age?" I smiled, and I laughed, because joy, real joy, is always worth the wait. And love, when it's quiet and steady and brave, doesn't care how many candles are on your cake. It just knocks softly and asks if you still want to dance. Have you ever been told it was too late to fall in love again? Or that your time had passed? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. Because sometimes, the greatest chapters come after everyone else thinks the book is closed.